Alright, so we're starting where we left off with Mali and the founder of the Mali Kingdom, Sundiata, or as some of you may know him as Simba in Lion King. He is known as the Lion Prince. He triumphed out of the ashes of his troubled childhood, and he would establish one of the greatest trading empires Africa would ever come to know. And because of the trans-Saharan trade route, Timbuktu, and of course Sundiata, coupled with Sundiata's rule, it promoted the growth of Timbuktu. This was a city that would be one of the last stops for traders and merchants and their caravans, because to go anywhere else, this was the epicenter of where you would get whatever you would need to complete your journey. So in that way it flourished. Without the trans-Saharan trade route, Timbuktu would not be a thriving city. It's, if you think about the throughway for us, and, why is Manhattan a city that flourishes? It's because many of the roads and the bridges that enable people to get there enable, the city to thrive. But it's also what the city offers. Timbuktu was a place, again, I think we talked about it briefly in the other video, where they had mosques and great libraries and a lot of influential centers where the markets conducted trade. Alright, so another great Mansa, or king of Mali, was Mansa Musa. And he's most significant for his trek across the trans-Saharan trade route all the way to Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula. And this is a great example of a pilgrimage, and it further encouraged the conversion of Islam by spreading the thought of Islam, and it also spread the knowledge of the gold salt trade and empowered Timbuktu to become even more of the bustling city that it was. Because Mansa Musa did travel all the way to Mecca, and he was able to bring back educators and architects and engineers. He brought them all back to Timbuktu, even though I don't believe he made it back. All of these scholars made it back to Timbuktu and were able to contribute to its society and continuation. And that's Mina in the background, sorry. And again, the evidence of Mansa Musa's trek to and from Timbuktu safely, for the most part, shows that many merchants were able and willing to communicate, converse, trade, and travel. So Timbuktu became more and more wealthy, as well as Mali. Now, Mansa Musa is also known for this Hajj, okay? When he trekked across the Trans-Saharan Desert, or the Saharan Desert, and he went to Mecca, all along the way, he gave enormous amounts of gold to different people. And again, this is part of that charity that every Muslim should follow as part of the 5 pillars. And by the time he was done with his charity and his Hajj, he gave away about $50 million, today's money. And because of this, it caused massive inflation. And if you don't know what inflation is, it's when the value of the currency or the money decreases, and then of course many things in turn are affected. So like prices go up because the currency is of a lower value. So it caused this inflation all throughout parts of Europe and the Middle East. Okay, so again, Mansa Musa dies in 1337 unexpectedly. But his legend really doesn't die. it's Mali that begins to weaken. So Mali breaks apart because of internal fighting politically as far as power goes. Now, the history behind all this is remembered with the Griot. And the Griot is this storyteller who values the concept of the memory. They were the ones who felt that writing lacked the warmth of a human voice. They are the ones who felt that writing would create stupidity, or it would create like the dumbing down of society. So they were very fervent in keeping the history and the memory of their heritage alive through their memory and verbally telling the stories. Now, again, Mali falls eventually, and Songhai comes in, who were known as the masters of the soil, or the masters of the water, which are, your farmers and your fishermen. Things start to change here. As you see, the time period is also changing. We're going to see the introduction of Europeans coming to parts of Africa. We're going to start to see a change in the technology that makes its way to Africa. And again, part of the reason why Songhai falls is because of the military technology that was superior to the northern invaders of Songhai. But again, nonetheless, all three West African trading kingdoms were known for the gold salt trade. Now, the reason why we also know so much about Mali is because of the writings of Eben Battuta. This is a guy who was known for exploring many different areas, and he reflected upon Timbuktu and the Empire of Mali as being this miraculous beast that he was able to be protected all throughout. He never felt threatened. He felt very safe as he traversed the lands, and in his 30 years of travel, he was able to compile all of his experiences into a book called Travels, and this enabled historians to analyze the different places during this period of time that Eben Battuta lived. Now, Eben Battuta is kind of like the Marco Polo, but this is the Eben Battuta of Africa and Asia. So Marco Polo, known for being from Europe and trekking across the Silk Road into Asia, you have Eben Battuta, who went across northern Africa all the way to even China as well. So here we have Eben Battuta's travels. So when he reflected upon different cities, it was credible because he had been to other places. It wasn't just, this narrow scope of knowledge. He actually did have the experience that many other people did not have, because this wasn't something that a lot of people did, where they went to all these different cities and then wrote them down. So he was definitely different in that regard. So on to East Africa, the Swahili Coast, which was also known as the Zenj Coast. This is the location where Arabs met, Indians met, Eastern Africans met. Arabs, if I didn't say it, I'm sorry, I'm going a little crazy here. So you have all these different people mixing. There's a cultural diffusion going on, and this is kind of what helps the language of Swahili to be conceived here. And different products were brought to Africa in this spot. For example, actually even in Madagascar, bananas, actually they're from originally Indonesia, and they made its way to Africa because of the Swahili Coast and the access to the Swahili Coast. So a quick note about women, because I know that's part of your homework as well. In Africa, polygamy was something that was practiced, very much so, not because of selfish desire to have more women, but more so, as far as historians are concerned, is that it helped to cultivate the crops, versus if you only have one wife with that group of kids, you're not able to produce as much when you have many wives and much more children. So This aspect, as far as polygamy goes for Africa, was more of an economic one, whereas in polygamy in the Arabian Peninsula was a little bit different there. If you want, in your textbook, I believe page 193 talks about 141 and 193 talk about women. But again, economically, in Arabia too, where they help with making clothing and different things in as far as trading goes, women had the ability to trade with other people and to have their own caravans. So that's good. But and also another comparison is that they were similar in the fact that although they did have certain privileges and rights, they still could not be warriors. They still couldn't serve, for the most part, in high positions of power as far as being like, and what a king could do. They did have certain rights in getting inheritance and land, but as far as political power goes, it's a little tougher. In Africa, the line at which things inherited and passed down was through matrilineal, was through the woman, and in Arabia it was more patrilineal, through the male line. Anyway, back to this. As far as the interaction of the Indian Ocean Trade Network, we already know that the dhow, which was definitely an integral piece of technology, enabled this trade, especially when dealing with monsoons. Depending on the season, it was a tough thing to do to get through the Indian Ocean. The proof that trade actually happened was that you could find different coins from different locations in the areas of the Swahili Coast, or in Indonesia, and in the southern parts of India. So here we have again an example of how Islam did spread to certain cities in Eastern Africa, not in Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, animistic beliefs resisted those very much so, resisted Islam very much so. But in East Africa, you could tell that Islam made its way, because in the names of the cities, you're looking at Arabic names, or just this influence of Arabic. Okay, here we got some examples of what was traded. You got your ivory, that of course came from elephant tusks. You have gold that came from the savannah, and then unfortunately you have the slaves, which are being brought to many different parts, especially the Arabian Peninsula. Now, but I want to point out that by the 1400s, the Chinese are going to stop traveling because they feel as though they don't really need to trade with other people, so they become more isolated in that regard, but they still continue to sell their products, so their products still make their way to Africa, but only through Arabian or Indian merchants, not from Chinese merchants. This is a video, we'll watch this when we're in class together, and I feel like we did this already. This is kind of just like a sum up of how religions make their way into different parts of Africa and what becomes most popular. So again, the depths of Africa, in Central Africa, are going to remain indigenous as far as the religion goes, and it's not until the 1800s, when the Europeans really come in to carve it up, that Christianity makes its way into the heart of Africa. Here are some of the commodities from India. So again, it's important to know different items that come from different places. We're going to watch a video on palm oil too as well. You could also go on YouTube and look up different videos of palm oil, or even the ivory. And then here we have China's products, and Here's the last piece of info you need. I don't have time to talk about it, but I will in class. Thanks.